So, well, Rabbeinu, what you were mentioning about the idea of Tisha B'Av, how to relate to it now, and how it's very difficult to try to connect to Tisha B'Av, considering that destruction of the temple was 1,956 years ago, however long, and it's very difficult to connect to that sort of thing. So, this is what Rabbeinu was mentioning in lesson 67, Torah Samer Zayin of Likutei Moharan Tinyana, Bereshit Le'enei Chol Yisrael, a very famous Torah he gave. It says, that which has passed is no longer. For our Bet HaMikdash has already been burned. However, at this time, Hashem is hoping to return down to us, meaning that's Hashem's ratzon. He's constantly longing to draw himself down. And to return and to rebuild our Bet HaMikdash. So it's fitting for us, if that's the case, if Hashem wants to come back down, it is fitting for us not to obstruct that plan. Not to prevent that plan, God forbid. Chad v'shalom. Binyan Bet HaMikdash, not to obstruct the building of the temple. The only thing we can do is to put effort to rebuild it. Therefore, a person has to be very careful to wake up at chatzot. To mourn the destruction of the temple. Because perhaps in your first reincarnation, it was you who destroyed the actual temple. It was because of you, because of your sinat chinam, or because of the averot that you had done. And even if not, perhaps now you're preventing the rebuilding of the temple. And it's considered also too right now as if you caused the destruction of it. If you aren't rebuilding it, Chachamim said any generation that did not rebuild the temple, it's as if it destroyed it in its days. Meaning that the destruction of the temple is happening every second. Why? Because it's not being rebuilt. It's not something like it's already been destroyed. Okay, great. No, it's being re-destroyed constantly by the fact that we're not rebuilding it. Because every single moment we have a chance to do it. So how do the tzaddikim build it? Through that. Anyone who possesses dat is as if he built a temple in his days. The entire inyan is dat. And because we lack that, we lack the rebuilding. So he says, it's fitting to wake up at chatzot to mourn and to, you know what I mean? To pour out our lamentations over the destruction of the temple. And Hashem Yitbarach promised to anyone who mourns over Tzion, over Yerushalayim, to place for the mourners of Tzion, pe'er splendor, in place of efer dust. Because we used to put ash, place of the tefillin, which is why we'll have the custom not to put on tefillin, shacharit, depending where you are, which custom you follow, but to put ash in the place of the tefillin. Because the efer took place of the pe'er, ever since the destruction of the temple. But Rabbeinu seems to be saying that when we mourn the destruction of the temple, the Chachamim say, you will see simchata v'inyanan, you'll see the simcha of the Shekhinah, and you'll see the rebuilding of the temple. Only when you merit there to mourn. And Rabbeinu says the main way to do it is waking up chatzot. That is the ultimate key to really taking Tisha B'Av. How much do you yearn to wake up chatzot? Do you wake up chatzot? Do you put in the alarm? You know what I mean? All that simple stuff that we think that we overlook, that's where all the avodah is, the Bet HaMikdash. And of course, obviously, Rabbi Nachman teaches us about the tzaddikim, that it's very difficult to connect to a building with the passing of the tzaddikim, which is a mitah that is not katuv in the Torah, the mitah that is this is a makkah that is lo ktuva b'Torah. Rabbi Nathan keeps bringing this down in Likutei Tefillot on lesson 60, on Tefillah 67, on this Tefillah. I think it's Tefillah 33 of volume 2. He keeps bringing down the idea that we're constantly, getting hit with a makkah that is not written in the Torah, a makkah that Hashem never promised to hit us with. And what is that? The mitah tzaddikim, that they're no longer here to guide us. But Rabbi Nathan constantly consoles us in the Tefillah, saying their Torah is here, and that they're constantly here, and they're bigger in their death than in their lifetime. You just have to really believe in the koach of the tzaddik to take in their Torah, their etzot, and you know what I mean, to really reinforce your dat. Instill yourself in that so that you can really rebuild the temple. Which is why Rabbi Nathan was known to say, my Mashiach is already here. That's the dat we're talking about. That you don't need the Mashiach to already change yourself. Like Rabbi Nachman says, you'll never see Rabbeinu talk about the inyan of like Mashiach at a very grandiose level, you know? The Mashiach. It's not his inyan. What he does say though is don't prevent the coming of the Mashiach. Because when do you live in the Bechina of the Mashiach and the Dat of the Mashiach? When you yourself are already in that Dat. Mashiach is going to bring a Dat, that's all he's going to do. Yeah. So when you live in that Dat, your Mashiach's already here. Depending who your Rabbi is, depending who your Tzaddik is. Yeah. So Rabbi Nachman writes in Chaimora, he says, I've attained the Hasaga now, that I can drop everything and bring the Mashiach with my Avodat Hashem. But I will not do so. Because bigger than bringing the Mashiach is drawing people back to Tshuva. As it says in the Zohar, worthy is the one that holds the hands of the wicked. The Chayavaya, the guilty. This is the inyan of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, the Tzadikim Amitim, to constantly redeem people through their Masim Tovim, through Tshuva, through, you know what I mean? All these inyanim that we're talking about. Because when you're in that level, you're in that state, you're already in Mashiach. Mm-hmm. At a collective level, yes, we wait to building the temple because that's obviously what we're talking about, at the collective madriga. Yeah. But at a personal level, to really feel the destruction of the temple, to really feel the building of the temple, to really feel the coming of the Mashiach, or maybe perhaps that I'm the one who prevents the Mashiach from coming to Chad v'Shalom, that obviously only comes whenever you really reinforce yourself, you do Avodat Hashem. Even to have the consciousness to cry at Chatzot is already a tremendous amount of consciousness. Yet alone to be at the Madriga, to know that you yourself are in the Madriga of that, as if you built the temple. All the tzaddikim build a temple of their own Mishkan. Rabbi Nachman says in Torah Reish Pebet that the tzaddikim, every tzaddik in the generation in the aspect of Moshe Rabbeinu has their own Mishkan, which means they're building their own Bet HaMikdash. So how much do you want to be a part of that Mishkan, that Bet HaMikdash? Do you want to be responsible in building it? Spread the light of the tzaddik? Because Rabbi Nachman says here, the entire destruction of the temple comes whenever the tzaddik leaves. The destruction of the temple is just an effect of the concealment of the tzaddik. When people have machloket against the tzaddik, it is even worse than the destruction of the temple. Double as worse. It says in the Gemara, Silukan shel tzaddikim kiflaim kechurban bet hamikdash. Kashe kiflaim kechurban bet hamikdash. I think along the lines of that the passing of tzaddikim is double as hard as the destruction of the temple. Chachamim, the Gemara teaches this. Which means, what are we talking about here? The Bet HaMikdash is one inyan, but the Da'at is what brings the Bet HaMikdash to life. The Kohen Gadol, without the Kohen Gadol, the Bet HaMikdash would never have the Avodah. It's a Kohen Gadol who is mechaper on all the sins of the Jewish people. And who is bigger than the Kohen Gadol? The Talmid Chacham. Yekara hi mipninim, it's in the Gemara. I think it's Gemara Yomar or something. Yekara hi mipninim is more precious, or she's more precious, mipninim, than pearls. What did it say? Mishinichnas lifnai v'lifnim, from the one who enters in the innermost chambers, which is the Kodesh HaKodashim. Meaning the Talmid Chacham is more precious than the Kohen Gadol who enters the Kodesh Kodashim once a year. Oh. Because we're talking about instilling that within the Jewish people. So the Tzaddik HaEmet, the Rosh Bait, who Rabbi Nachman teaches us in this lesson, the Rosh Bait, the head of the house, he's the one who tends to the Bet HaMikdash. He's the one who tends to the generation and makes sure everyone's in their proper place. No one's running out of line. No one's running out of their proper madriga, their boundaries. Mm-hmm. He makes sure everyone tends to each and every grass and each and every soul the way they need to, you know? And when they pass away, when they leave this world, meaning a physical concealment, that's where the destruction of the temple receives its force from. Because the entire goal of tzaddikim is to bring light, and the temple is fire. It's the opposite. Meorei Esh versus Meorei Or. Luminaries of light versus luminaries of fire. Fire is the thing that destroyed the temple. Vayatzet Esh Betzion vatochal yesodoteh. A fire descended from Tzion and ate its foundations. Meaning, Mimarom shalach et ba'atzmotai. From up on high, Hashem sent fire ba'atzmotai in my bones. The Bet HaMikdash is speaking from the first person. Mm-hmm. But yet, the Meorei Or is all the light of the tzaddik, who's constantly bringing light to the Bet HaMikdash. And how do you mitaken this? By making famous the light of the tzaddik. The entire rebuilding of the temple comes when you make famous the light of the tzaddik. How hafatzah? spreading the light of the true tzaddikim, spreading the light of Rabbeinu when we're speaking about this sort of idea. Because this is where the tikkun of the Bet HaMikdash starts and it finishes. If the Bet HaMikdash, if double as harsh as the Bet HaMikdash is the passing of the tzaddikim, we have to make sure that the tzaddikim never pass away at a spiritual place.
So it's about this. Okay.
How much are you spreading the light?
Mm-hmm.
How much are you diffusing? The entire idea of what Rabbeinu speaks about in Sipur Masad, the Ashkot Dagan, to water the garden. Are you going to be responsible to spread these springs outward, the fountain of the tzaddik outward? So that's how you mitaken the destruction of the temple, being mefarsem the shem of the tzaddik, making famous the name of the tzaddik, because it's the Torah that will change people. So I think it's a very good reminder for Tisha B'Av that we just passed through, especially now Shabbat Nachamu. We're going through the 7 weeks of Nechama, 7 weeks of consolation. Rabbi Nachman's name is literally Nachman. It's consolation. The entire idea that the true tzaddik's entire goal is to bring you consolation. To say, reinforce yourself, find Nikudot Tovot, lift yourself back up. You might be very far from Hashem Yitbarach, but focus on the Nikudat Tovah. You can find Nechama in the fact that you still put on tefillin, and that you put on your talit every morning, that you say Modeh Ani, and you're still a Jew, that you say Shiru Asani Go every morning. Or the fact that you put on your alarm and don't even wake up. Because all these inyanim are very precious in Hashem's eyes. And He wants to return to us. But how much effort are we going to put in to return to Him, you know? Yeah. And that's what the true tzaddik's job is to do, to increase your consciousness, to make you more capable of seeing Hashem, to find Hashem, to search for Hashem. The entire goal of the true tzaddik is to do one thing, to make you an animal to search for Hashem. Meaning, never stop searching. That's the goal of the true tzaddik. Never give up. Always search for Him in the downs and in the ups. That's the goal of the true tzaddik. What does it say? Ki chol b'shamayim ha'aretz. Ki chol b'shamayim ha'aretz. For everything is in the heaven and the earth. So what did it say? In Targum Yonatan, I think? Or no, it could be in Targum Yonatan or Targum Kedus, I forget. Kol man dimyachet shemayim ba'ara. Anyone who unifies the heaven and the earth. The true tzaddik, his entire goal, because he's chol, he's the yesod, he's a tzaddik yesod olam, he unifies that which is up and down. Meaning what? To show a person who's up, he still has a long way to go. He can still search for Hashem. And to show a person who's down, not to give up. He unites the heaven and the earth. To show you no matter which place you are, you can serve Hashem Yitbarach. There's no place that is void of being searching for Hashem. In the downs, that is specifically where you have to be searching, where people tend to be unfortunately mistaken to think, if I'm down, Hashem is not here. No, it's the exact opposite. Hashem is with you more than He is up there. But you have to search. You have to never give up.
What do you mean by search? What does that mean?
You have to search for Hashem. You have to be with Hashem everywhere you go. Amen was not saying to make excuses, God forbid, for Hashem going into the wrong places. The entire goal of the true tzaddik is to give you consciousness to know what is wrong versus right. Yeah. Meaning when you're there, you'll know you're there and you know you're not in a good place. But even when you're there, you have to constantly tell yourself, En shum yamesh ba'alam chab. There's no such thing as despair at all. It doesn't exist. It's not even in the dictionary. The word despair does not exist. It has no substance. It doesn't exist. It's not even a word. That's the true tzaddik's goal. Whether you're in the down, where you feel like you can give up, where you feel like you need to give up, where you feel like God is void from that place, where you feel like Hashem is not present. No, that's exactly where you have to reinforce yourself, to teach yourself that Hashem is here more than anywhere. And when you're up, Hashem is far away. You have to continue moving, meaning you never stop running. Whether you're down or up, because you're always moving. Tamid ba'alacha, you're constantly going ba'alacha. You're always in the walking direction. You're always searching. That's the true tzaddik's goal. Like Rabbi Nachman says, "Ratziti shitiyu kechayot hanoamot bayar." He says, "Nachon atem anashim ksharim, aval lo lazot hayta kanavanati." Yes, it's true. You guys are upright people. He told his students, but that was not my kavanah. I wanted you guys to be like animals howling in the forest all night. Lelot shlemim, complete nights. Chatzot, get up, go to eat, scream in the forest. Meaning you never stop searching for Hashem. It's what Chabinata, whenever he came to Rabbeinu spoke about the Torah 6. That was it was Shabbat Shuvah actually, when Rabbi Natan approached Rabbeinu for the first time and spent the first Shabbat. And Rabbeinu started speaking about Torah Vav, Baki Beratzo, Baki Besho, running and returning, how to find Hashem in the ups and in the downs. And Rabbi Nathan was so inspired by this. He went out to the forest that entire night and started screaming, in Breslev burns a fire, light this fire within me. And he's praying to Hashem the entire night. And when he returned back to Rabbeinu in the morning, Rabbeinu looked at him and he said, it's not just one night of tefillah. You spend your entire life in tefillah. Entire life. You're praying all night. So we should have the merit to wake up chatzot, because that's the real avodah of rebuilding the temple today, to mourn the destruction. And even if you feel nothing because your heart is so obstinate, it's so strong, it's such a heart of stone, pray to Hashem. You can pray to Hashem that your heart is a heart of stone. That's what sincerity is all about. That's what Rabbi Nachman teaches us. That when you don't have kavanah, at least make a conversation about the fact that you don't have kavanah. When you feel insincere, tell Hashem that you feel insincere. Make that a true conversation, because you can always be sincere with Hashem, according to your madriga. Which I think is a very powerful piece of advice, especially for us when we see that our biggest critics, we're always harshly judging ourselves, especially with the tzaddik of Rabbi Nachman, who has so much koach. It can be very difficult all the time, because he shows you all of this, shows you all the big, amazing things, Avodat Hashem, and you're here and you feel like the biggest low life. And he's telling you, lift yourself back up. That's where we need the balance. With Rabbi Nachman, you can get both ways. You can judge yourself so harshly because you see the greatness, or you can be extreme, because Rabbi Nachman's Torah is such a Torah of Chesed. It comes from the place of Keter. There's so much of Rachamim that you can, God forbid, if you don't have the Bechina Mishpat, fall into excuses, God forbid. Which is very dangerous. Fall into laziness, lightheadedness, go to bad places and make excuses, That's why Rabbi Nachman always said, Halacha, Shulchan Aruch, Chok v'lo ya'avor. Study Shulchan Aruch, Chok v'lo ya'avor. This is a statute that must never be overpassed. It must never be overlooked. Every single day you must study Shulchan Aruch, Halacha. Because even though Rabbi Nachman is giving us a Torah that is a Bechin of Torah Aleph, it's the Torah that is before the Bet of Bereshit. It's a perspective of the Torah that is 13 Midot HaRachamim, Keter, the Torah Ma'atik Astima, the Torah of the Mashiach, the hidden ancient one. We nonetheless have to live in this world and not forget that the Torah is built upon the Bet, which is Kasher, Asur, Mutar, Asur, all these things. So that's the balance, which is very, you know what I mean? Yeah. Finding the balance with Rabbeinu. And we should merit to have that. B'ezrat Hashem. So, back to Torah Samech, where we left off. We talked about last time the idea that what?
It was
the kavuach, the cold spirit, right? The breath. The extended breath has to do with ashirut. Now, when a person goes into extended breath, when a person to attain the bechin of ashirut, wealth, which leads into Ibonenut, you need to have this arichut and neshima, this extended breath. And now Rabbeinu is going to delve into the subject of what extended breath means. We talked about earlier how the arichut and neshima is connected to the geshamim, the rain, which is the parnasah, the matar, the otzar, which is the otzar of Yirat Shamayim. All these inyanim connected, all in one bundle. How Rabbeinu says, he gives us the structure of how it's built. One thing leading to the next. You know? Yirat Shamayim. It's all these, how they lead from one thing to the next. And what were we saying about this idea? We're talking about the wealth of the extremely wealthy, the money of the wealthy is his stronghold. And we talked about the Oz being the Geshem Mitrot Uzo, the reins of his strength, the reign of Hashem's Oz, his power. Which is the idea of Oz, Geshem, that we connected this idea, which is also, and we said, what did we say earlier? Shashirut, that the wealth, which is the hon, is through the neshima, through the breath. That we talked about, the extended breath, which is aviraka, which is the cold breath. That person receives from the outside every single moment, which is kiryat uzo, coming from the word koch. Hitkaverut, coolness. That cold breath brings you uzo, which is the what? The geshem, which is the parnasah, which is the ashirut. So all of that is connected. And then you have the havle goyim, which is the vapors of the goyim, which is what? short breath.
Short breath, yeah.
Which is what we talked about when a person's with his wife, how there has to be short breath in that instant, in two different scenarios that we talked about.
Yeah.
So the tipa is hot when it comes out, and so the second thing is that because you cannot have extended breath, you cannot have to be able to push out for the exerting force to be able to push out the drop, you cannot be taking in fluid. Yeah, you cannot be taking in air.
Yeah.
You have to be pushing out. So it has to be seize breath, and the breath comes out with the drop also. The head comes out with the drop, which affects the child and all these that we got to. Okay, and then we finished off. The soul of the Almighty shall bring you bina, ibonanut, because the ikar of ibonanut comes through the neshima, venishmat, which is what? Neshima, the breath. Which is that cold spirit that we talked about above, the air that a person takes in. That's where we left off. That the arichut neshima causes the geshem, which then brings the ashirut, and through ashirut you attain ibonanut. Those are the steps. Ki.
Ki ikar.
Ki ikar.
There's two.
Tikkun haSechel, you see?
Yeah. Okay. Ki ikar tikkun haSechel hu al yedei neshima. Ki ikar haSechel sheyeh al tikkuno sheyuchal lehiponen hu al yedei hashmanim shebaguf ki haSechel hu kmo ner hadolek ki hu hadolek al yedei hashmanim שנמשכים אליו, והם כמו שמן שנמשך אל פתילה הדולקת.
Exactly. So, maybe we go to the. Is there a period over there?
Yeah.
Okay. Top. Okay. כי עיקר תיקון השכל, for the main rectification of the sechel, the intellect, is through the neshima, through the breath, the extended breath that we talked about. So now Rabbi Nachman is going to come explain the reason why through arichut neshima you arrive to ibonanut. Now Rabbi is going to give us a logical, very deep explanation for this. For the entire tikkun of the intellect, the way to rectify the intellect, to properly create an intellect that is capable of, Hidbonanut and all these things, to properly rectify the intellect, to put the intellect in its proper place, is through the neshimas, through the breath. Why? Because the ikar of the sechel, the main aspect of the intellect, sheyad tikkuno, so that it should be on it, rectify that it should be al tikkuno, in order, sheyuchal lidbonen, so that it's capable of being contemplating, entering those shvilei sechel, entering those pathways of intellect in the Torah, hu al yedei hashmanim shebaguf, is thanks to the oils in the body, the fats in the body. Meaning the moisture that is constantly flowing throughout the body, that go throughout the body, circulate through the blood, and obviously go up to the brain, etc., and bring moistness, bring moisture to the brain. They bring this wetness essentially, but this oil to the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that? Now Rabbi Nachman is going to explain. And by the way, this goes very deep into a very special lesson, Tzipur HaMasiot, about the Bal Tefillah. Speaks about the Tzafati. HaMeshuga, we'll talk about it actually right now. The crazy Frenchman in Tzipur HaMasiot. Very, very interesting idea that Rabbi Nachman's hinting to. We'll talk about it in the Papa of the Chochmah when we get to the commentary, but very, very deep. So what is all this idea? Ki, why? Ki hasechel hu kmo ner hadolek. Because the intellect is like a lit candle. The mind is like a lit candle. Because how is the candle lit? How is the intellect, the brain lit, essentially? Through the oils which are brought up to it, which flow with the blood and are brought all the way up to the brain, and the moisture that flows throughout the body. The moisture that flows throughout the body arrives at the brain, and that moisture gives life to the intellect. Essentially, what is the oil? The oil is like the oil on a candle, and the wick is the brain, which is fed through the oil. So what's he saying? This is like the oil, which is drawn to the lit wick. How does the wick constantly stay lit? Through the oil. When there's no oils in the body, meaning when you draw out that moisture, God forbid, the intellect cannot be lit up with ibonanut. Essentially, almost the sechel is the wick. The oil is obviously the oil, and the light which comes out from the sechel is the ibonanut. The brain itself transforms with the oil to ibonanut. If you need to take it, by the way, go for it. Very good. And now I'm going to discuss the entire structure right now, how the oils are brought up to the brain, and how that depends on the lungs, which is where the air is, which is where the neshima is. How the neshima is responsible for the intellect. Because we're just explaining right now that the only way for the intellect to be in its proper tikkun, for it to be in proper order, for you to be able to enter those levels of contemplation, because even if you have the bechina yirat shamayim, which we talked about, leads to the geshem and all these ideas, right? Or the arichut neshima, which comes from the yirat shamayim, which then leads you to the geshem, which leads you to the parnasa, which leads you to the bonanut. You can have all that idea, but if you don't have moisture in the body, you have no ability to enter those levels of Ibonanut. Because Ibonanut is all dependent on the lechot shebaguf, the moisture of the body, the oils, the shmanim in the body. So look what Rabbi Nachman teaches us, that what? Like you mentioned earlier. This is like the oil that is drawn to the ptila hadoleket. So finish off that line.
Yeah. Sorry, just lost my
Very good.
Sorry, where is that?
You're good. כי השכל הוא כמו נר הדולק, כי הדולק על ידי השמנים שנמשכים אליו, והם כמו שמן שנמשך על פתילה הדולקת. See it?
Oh yeah. וכשאין שמנים בגוף, אין השכל יכול לדלוק בהתבוננות, ומזה באים ומשוגעים על ידי שנתייבשים לחות הגוף. על ידי זה נתקלקל המוח, על ידי שאין לו שמנים לדלוק.
So what happens? Now whenever the secha doesn't have enough fuel to light up in Ibonanut, because you have no more moisture in the body, what ends up happening? This creates mishugaim, crazy people. It says now, Rabbi Nachman's going to enter this idea, what a mishuga really, what he intends to be saying is a bechinat kama brit. So why? From this comes mishugaim, meaning what? Not only did they not have arichut neshima, because a meshuga, which we're going to talk about right now as bechinat kama brit, is the exact idea of hefsek neshima. We're going to talk about how that's pause breath and not arichut neshima, because he's mixing all the key components of arichut yirat shamayim, which is the exact opposite, which is kama brit is what's the idea? What we mentioned earlier, chemda for yofi anashim, the desire for a beautiful woman. You're in the bechina of hevel hayofi, you're in the idea of vain beauty because you're in the bechina of pugem babrit. So we're going to talk about all this idea. Not only that are you not able to attain arichut amim, arichut neshima, all these ideas, but you will definitely not be able to enter Ibonanut because you've already drawn out the moisture of your body by being pugem babrit. Bring your zerach hakasham, which is the moisture of the brain, to a different place. So now we're understanding now why whenever a person goes with his wife, that you have to dry your brain at one point because you're taking the moisture out, which is why there has to be hefsek neshima. Even though you can be in the bechina of kedusha v'brit and all this idea, there has to be a hefsek neshima because you're taking out the moisture. So we're all entering this idea. Now, Rabbi Nachman said obviously one's in kedusha, one's in tumah, chad v'shalom. But we're going to talk about how from this comes mishugaim, and I'll give you a little thing that it's mentioned over here. When did the meshuga? When did the person become meshuga? Literally a crazy person. We see this in LA. Walk around the street, you see meshuga. That's the practical example for this. In most cases, the meshugaim, they're bechina pogem babait, which is why they have no place, no home, because they have no bite to live in, because they've completely drawn out their moisture. Everything is all the idea of the dot being completely taken away. Which obviously affects their home. Rabbi Natan explains the entire idea. A person to then properly have a place to live and all these inyanim. And in addition to the nechot haguf, ועל זה נתקלקל המוח, על ידי שאין לו שמנים לדלוק. And when this happens, you damage the brain so that now there's no oil. על ידי שאין לו שמנים לדלוק, because the brain has no oil to be lit, to go into Ibonanut. The brain's awake, but it has no fuel because you've taken away all the moisture of the body and you've drawn it somewhere where it did not need to go. So what ends up happening now? The moisture of the body are dried out, coming from the hefsek neshima, which is what? The chemda for hevel yofi anashim, which is for vain beauty and for desiring beautiful women, which is bechinat kama brit. So now let's see what Rabbi Nachman says. Rabbi Nachman also says in Torah Lamed Vav, Od Vav, lesson 36, section 6, also in Sefer Amidot, that what? This is what the Chachmei HaRefuah, the wise doctors, explain this as Saruch Refuah LaMeshuga, that castrating an individual is a refuah for craziness. Well, a person who's crazy, the way they used to do back then in Egypt, which is why a lot of the officers, like Potiphar, was castrated. Why? Because they were Meshugayim. So what was the refuah? Used to castrate them. What's the connection? Because why are they Meshuga? Because they're Pogem Babrit, because they drew out all the moisture of the body. But now that they have no place to be Pogem Babrit anymore, because you castrate them, it ends up restoring their moisture. Because they're not drawing their moisture out into the wrong place. That's why. That's a secret explanation as to why it's mentioned that why the doctors back then were saying that the refuah for craziness is castration, which is a very interesting subject. Because now we can understand that one who's pogem in the brit, one who damages the alliance, the covenant, he loses the moisture of the body, and through this he dries out his brain until he reaches to a point of shigaon. You lose your dat completely. You lose your moch completely. Rabbi Nachman speaks about this in many different lessons. There is a beautiful Indian Tzipur Masiyot, the story of the Baal Tzila, about the Tzarfati Meshuga, the crazy Frenchman. And why is it crazy Frenchman? Because the entire idea of the Ta'ava France, Rabbi Nachman goes into this, is the Bechina of Pgama Brit. This Chemda for Yofi Anashim. And he explained over there that Tzarfati Meshuga, why is it crazy Frenchman? Because he lost all the oils of his body. That's why he's going crazy. Now Rabbi Nachman is going to explain how this has to do with Ashirut and all this idea. Now we understand how this connects with Ashirut. Because whenever you fall into Chemda for Yofi Anashim, you fall into the Hebel Yofi Chadeshalom, you dry out the moisture of the body, which then what? Doesn't allow you to take Bonanut, which is the Bechina of Ashirut. So what ends up happening? Falling into this place is affecting your Ashirut. Many lessons Rabbi Nachman explained, the one who's Pogem Babrit affects his wealth. For sure. So, the Papa Chochmah is going to explain this in his commentary. But Rabbi Nachman, as he was explaining this lesson, he brought a pasuk. Kesef nivchar leshon tzadik. Kesef nivchar, the choicest silver, the most precious silver, leshon tzadik is the tongue of the tzadik. What does that have to do with anything? Rashi Tevot, franc.
Of what?
Rashi Tevot, if you take the first letters, Kesef, Nivchar, you have Chaf, Nun, Leshon, Lamed, or no, Kesef, my bad, Safet Tevot. Take the last letter. Kesef, you have to pay. Nivchar, Resh, Leshon, Nun, Tzadik, Kuf. Pe, Resh, Nun, Kuf, franc, which is the currency, the franc.
Oh.
Which is why the entire idea of the French, because they fall into Chemda for Yofi Anashim, the Tzarfati Meshuga, they fall into this Bechina of Mammon, and they are not able to properly use their money. The entire thing the Papa Chochmah goes into, and how Rabbi Nachman hinted to this idea already within the Pasuk, which is an amazing chidush, but how it's connected, the Brit to the Parnasa.
Okay.
So now let's see what it says. Let's see what he's explaining here. No. Let me see, 1 second. You can continue a little bit.
ולאכול השמנים שבגוף הם על ידי הנשימה, כי אלמלא כנפי ריאה לנשבים על ליבה, הווה ליבה עוקה כל גופה. נמצא שעיקר קיום שמנוני ולאכול שבגוף הוא על ידי הנשימה שמקבלת הריאה רוח קר מבחוץ לקרר הלב. ואם על ידי זה קיום השכל שיוכל לדלוק בפוננות כנע.
We can, let's translate it. You can even continue until the end of section Dal.
Okay. וזה בחינה, נר השם נשמע לאדם, שעיקר קיום ותיקון נר השם, שהוא השכל, הוא על ידי נשמה כנע. נמצא שעל ידי יראה זוכים לאריכות ימים, שעל ידי זה נמשך העשירות, שעל ידו באים להתבוננות כנע.
So, all the moisture, all the oils of the body are through the neshima, through the breath, whenever you take the cold air from outside. It's all dependent on how you're breathing it. Why? Because the Chachamim say, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai writes in Tikkun Zohar, explains, in male kanferea de nasuna liba, ave liba okit kol gufa. If not for the lobes of the lungs fanning the heart would burn up the entire body. Because the heart has so much heat, it needs the cages of the lungs surrounding it to fan cold air that it receives from the inside. When you take in the air, that air is responsible to cool off the heat of the heart. If not for the lobes of the lung fanning upon the heart would burn up the entire body in heat. Mm-hmm. So we need the coolness of the lungs to counteract that fire. Meaning what? If not for the ruach that comes from the lungs, which is the ruach that we're taking in, the arichut neshima that we're taking in, that cold ruach, and not blowing up, if it doesn't blow on the heart, and to cool it off, the heat of the heart would obviously destroy everything. It would burn off the entire body. So we see that ruach of the neshima, which enters the lungs, brings coolness to the body, and sustains the body by default. Meaning what? It gives the ability for the oils to pass through. Because if not, the heart would burn everything to shreds. So we see, nimtza, what's the result of all this? That the main sustenance and fattiness of the moistures of the body, because the heat of the heart would burn up all the oil, is thanks to what? The lungs, through the breath, through the neshima. Which, what? When a person receives the rea, or whenever the lungs receive that ruach, that cold ruach from the outside to cool off the heat of the heart. And through this is the kiyum hasechel. Through this, the intellect is sustained, it is rectified.
So breathing.
Huh?
So it's in the breath.
The breath, yeah. The breath is responsible for the intellect.
Mm-hmm.
That shiuchad yilok beitbonanut, and then the intellect now that it has that arichut neshima, which it protects it from the heart burning up everything, and now allows the moisture to travel to the brain. For now, the brain's able to use that moisture, those fats, that oil, and to light it up into itbonanut. And this is what it says in the pasuk, in Mishnah. Ner Hashem, the candle of God. Nishmat Adam is the soul of man. What does that mean? Sheikar et kiyum et tikun Ner Hashem, that the main sustenance and the way to rectify the Ner Hashem, the candle of Hashem, which is what? Shu HaSechel, which is the Sechel. Hu aledei neshima kana, is through the breath. Nishmat Adam, the neshima of Adam. When a man breathes, he takes in a neshima, he takes in a breath. You create a Ner Hashem, you create a candle for Hashem. You create a candle that you're able to perceive and to enter the bonanut of Hashem. That's a way the soul to translate that pasuk. Obviously, there's many ways to translate the pasuk. The candle of Hashem is like a soul of man, that has the soul, a person's soul is considered God's candle. And then you have the neshama, which is in the sechel. Person's neshama is in his brain. The Arizal explains. So there's many ideas here how the Ner Hashem is nishmat, and the candle of Hashem is a soul of man. What's the candle we're talking about? The neshama of a person, which is up here in the mind. So it's the way to sustain the neshama is through the breathing. So what? Ner Hashem shu machshava, the candle of Hashem, which is the machshava and the sechel of a person, is lit through the neshima. Thanks to the neshima. So what do we see? What's the sikum of all this? What's the summary of all this? Shalidei yira, that through yira, meaning that you protect yourself from being chomed after a beautiful woman, and whenever you do that, you attain arichut neshima. So through yira, which helps you attain arichut neshima, extended breath, through this zochin arichut, you merit length of days. Yirat Hashem tosif yamim, as we talked about earlier. The fear of Hashem prolongs a person's days. You attain arichut yamim, which is the idea of constantly adding kedusha every single day, avodat Hashem every single day, and starting the day small, but obviously expanding as the day goes on. Greatening your kli, being better than you were today than you were the day before. And whenever you have arichut yamim, then you're able to draw Ashirut down to a person. Then the person is capable of receiving Hashem's Ashirut, Hashem's wealth. That through that Ashirut, a person arrives to that Hidbonanut. Lot of
that's a lot.
Rabbeinu Baruch Hashem, he went many different places.
Yeah.
Thank God. So let's see what he says here. Maybe there's inyanim here. Let's see what it says over here. So we said earlier that what? The main sustenance of the oils and the fats of the body is through the breath, the neshima, right? So what do we say? That the neshima comes from that those oils of the body come from the opposite of kitzur neshima, when a person's breath is seized or it's half. What does that mean? When a person is desiring beautiful woman, or falls into this bechina galavrit, in a sense, he seizes his breath ceases to have the koach of arichut or length, right? Extension. Mm-hmm. And this chemda for hevel hayofi, this desire for vain beauty, not only causes that you do not have arichut haneshima, but also burns the heart tremendously in this fire of tava. Which means what? You're drying up the oils of the body. Because by default now that your breath is not extended, your breath doesn't have enough, your lungs do not have enough coolness to cool off the desire of the heart. So not only, this is the beauty of it, when a person falls into chemda for yofi anashim, where does that chemda come from? The heart, the fire of the heart, the tava of the heart. And when the tava of the heart takes strength, what ends up happening by default? Hefsek anashima. You have pause breath, because it's the exact opposite.
So you're not cooling down the heart.
You're not cooling down the heart, which means what? Your moisture is slowly being weakened. So Rabbeinu is very much entering the idea here that whenever you do fall into this hevel hayofi, by default your body doesn't have enough strength, or your lungs do not have enough coolness, moisture to cool off the heat of the heart, which ends up deepening the tava, preventing the ashirut, creating a blocker on ashirut, and preventing the idbonanut, of course. So that's how we talked about this. There's another idea in lesson 141. Oh no, sorry, in lesson 225. Rabbi Nachman explains, Ikar HaSechel al yedei ha'achluchi, ha'olim and ha'moach. We talked about earlier that the essence of sechel, intellect, is through the moisture of the body that rises up to the brain. Shehem bechinat hashemen. For this moisture is the aspect of oil. This fat is the aspect of oil. V'hamoach ha'pitila. And the brain is the aspect of the wick. And the neshama within the brain is the light. That's the ibonanut. The soul of Shaddai, of the Almighty, what soul are we talking about? The neshama that is in the moach tevinem brings bina. When you arrive at the neshama, thanks to the fact that you've sustained the oils of the body that are able to rise up to the brain, now the brain's able to light itself up into ibonanut, to enter those pathways of ibonanut, then your neshama is sustained. Until then, you cannot give strength to the neshama unless you subdue that hevel hayofi, that chemda for yofi anashim, which then gives you access to give you moisture to the body, give you moisture to the lungs, sustenance to the heart, cooling off the heart, all this structure, which is pretty amazing. Let's see, there's also another inyan that's mentioned here. I'm going to read from Likutei Halachot. Let's see what Rabbi Nathan says in Likutei Halachot. Even ha'ezah, kiddushin, halacha bet, ot chet. Hazivug hu b'chinat hesek haneshima. Zivug, marital relations, is in the aspect of pause of breath. Vehu hefech idbonanut, it's the opposite of idbonanut. Vehu hefech arichut yamin, it's the opposite of length of days, arichut yamin. Ki hu mekatzer chayim ba'adad, because it shortens a person's life and a person's death. This is why Rabbeinu said in Chayim Moran, he says, to show you the madriga Rabbi Nachman reached in Sichot HaAnsari. Rabbi Nachman said like this, he said, this ta'ava for women, this ta'ava for ta'avat HaMishka, this ta'ava for women, this ta'ava for sexual immorality, all this stuff, he said, I do not understand entirely. I don't understand it. Why? Because he says, the other ta'avot I understand, money, how can you survive? Food, how can you survive without it? But this, not only is it so foolish, he says it doesn't even give you, it takes away your energy. To the point where it doesn't even help you. That's to show you the level of sechel we're talking about that he reached. That he didn't understand how people fall with this. So Rabbi Nathan explains in Likutei Halachot, he explains this in Chayim Moran when Rabbi Nachman speaks like this. He says, well, Rabbi Nachman speaking from a madriga after he already broke all his ta'avot, but when he was in it at the beginning, meaning when he had to fight the Satan in this, to engage in this fight, he too obviously had to be tested. Not to say that he was never tested in this. So Rabbi Nachman is speaking at this because he's saying at the place of that, you understand how foolish it is. He speaks about the Chemda for Yofi Anashim, and he explains an entire story, forget where it's possible in Sichot Haran, that when a person goes up into the next world, there was a story of a man, a tzaddik, who saw in the next world a bunch of pieces of flesh. And he was confused by it. And it looked disgusting, it looked like rotten, it was like weird. Like all conjumbled together, mixed up together, this, that, until they put it together and it's a beautiful woman. And he said, now I understand that. Beautiful woman, if you really looked at what she was in the next world, you wouldn't even...
Yeah.
It's not even... It shouldn't even arise in your head, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's an entire inyan about that idea of how Chemda for Yofi Nashi comes from a lack of that. Obviously very difficult because we all lack that. I mean, if we had one tipa of chokhmah, one drop of chokhmah, you would be able to look at a man and a woman and there would be absolutely no difference to you. This is the Madriga of Tzadikim. Madriga of Tzadikim. But through tefillah, through Iboradut, through all these inyanim, we're able to arrive at these awesome levels, you know?
I just have to go in like 3 minutes.
Yeah, it's fine. So let's see this. So whenever you attain this, what did we say earlier? So let's see what Raminat says in the that zivug is the aspect of hefsek haneshima, which is the opposite of idboranut, which is the opposite of arichut yamim, as we said earlier. Because it shortens a person's life, a person's dat. Because rubam, the majority of people, metim mitavazo, die from this tava. What does that mean? Chachmei HaRafaim explain, as it's brought down in Shulchan Aruch, כמובן בשולחן ערוך, וכל המשוגעים וחסידיה באים מזה, כידוע לחכמי הרפאים. Now what? If you look at Orach Chaim, Siman Resh Mem, if you done it over there, it explains this idea that all the Meshugaim, all those who lack that, come from this Bechina of Hefsek and Neshima, which is Bechina Mita. It's a Bechina Mita because you're lining up the entire body with, you have no moisture to what do you call it? To counteract the heat of the heart. I'm curious to look at the Shulchan Aruch. Hopefully next time whenever we study, I'll look at it and I'll report back to you on what it explains over there. But how this idea can really, this tava is so, it comes from such a place of fantasy and nedama and imagination, and such a lack of that it can really, it can convince a person to do everything because your dat is not in place. So we really have to pray to subdue this chemda, to subdue this hefsek neshima. Because with that our parnasa. Amenu is explaining the secret of parnasa comes to arichut neshima, which comes to tikkun abrit. Which is an amazing idea how Amenu connects it all together. B'ezrat Hashem, next class we'll start and continue.